I will never forget, we turn up 4 weeks later. I've transferred the $18,000 and we turn up and we look at him and we go, this is just nothing like we asked for. He says, no, you're right. It doesn't fit anything. But I tell you what, you give me a third of your business, I'll help you in your business. I'll rebuild the website for you. So we had no money. We had no money in the bank account, like nothing. We didn't have a platform or a website. And there's a decision point there. Do you give him a third or do you bury the hatchet? And it's interesting. What do you think we did?
Hi everyone, I'm your host Rohit Bhargava and you are listening to episode 200 of the Startup Playbook podcast, a weekly series where I sit down with successful tech founders, investors and operators to unpack their journey, lessons and insights to help current and future entrepreneurs. Before we get into this episode, I just wanted to say a big thank you to all of you for tuning in over the last 8 years and 200 episodes. Your support has meant the world to me personally and the podcast would be where it is today without all of you, so I just wanted to say a big thank you. All right, so now coming back to this episode, I am delighted to have Jason Wyatt, the co-founder and CEO of Marketplacer, as our guest for this episode. Jason's journey started with a bike marketplace called BikeExchange, the success of which led to him launching 8 different joint ventures in different industries. Despite some success with this model, Jason saw a much bigger opportunity to build this as a platform play and decided to shut down the 8 different ventures to go all in on Marketplacer. Marketplacer is a marketplace platform designed for enterprise customers to help them scale and grow their e-commerce operations. They count customers such as Qantas, Tesco and Optus as clients and have raised over $85 million in funding from leading investors globally. In this episode, we covered a wide range of topics, including why Jason decided to shut down 8 different companies to go all in on Marketplacer, lessons from launching, growing and hiring globally, the importance of having strategic investors like Salesforce Ventures, and much more. Without further ado, here is my episode with Jason Wyatt. Hi, Jason. Welcome to the Startup Playbook podcast, and thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Rohit. It's a pleasure to be on the show, but most importantly, part of the community.
Yeah, no, really appreciate it. And you've got such an incredible story as well that we're going to get into. But Jason, for those people that may not be as familiar with you and your background, do you want to share a little bit about your story and what got you here today?
Yes, I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Marketplacer, which is one of my later startups, to be honest, but I have had a few startups along the journey. I was original co-founder of BikeExchange, which was a global bike marketplace, and then part of many other marketplaces across the journey in there.
Yeah, I did have the good fortune of speaking to your co-founder, Sam, who, from what I understand, you guys were childhood best friends?
Yeah, we actually went to grade prep together and primary school together.
Wow.
So it's a bit of a weird relationship in a way. Our sons are born 12 days apart. His son's at my house still 3-4 times a week, and we're best mates, and so to do a journey like we've done over I want to say a 21-year journey, but it's actually not. It's more like a 42-year journey, and still remain best friends is quite remarkable. Yeah,
no, that's amazing. I'm fortunate as well. I'm still very close to a lot of my friends from high school, and I think just having those friendships that last that length of time is super important. But I guess it's even more rare, not only for those friendships to last, but also for you guys to have started multiple businesses together and to continue working together. But one thing Sam mentioned was that, as fun as you were when you were a kid, there was always this kind of sense that, you were really sort of driven and, you kind of took your marks at school very seriously and had a sort of path. Was that, I guess, where did that sort of come from for you?
It's interesting because I think it's an ultimate competitor, if that makes sense. I'm a competitive person against myself the most, more so than against others, if that makes sense. But I often think of where that inner drive and competitiveness come from, and I think it's your family upbringing. Like I had an incredibly, really highly functional, competitive brother who really drove it out of you every single day of the week, and from the minute you got up to the minute you went to sleep, we're playing a competitive sport, or we've got to beat each other at something. And, I think that nature, nurture, I think the nature was in me, but the nurture side of the family was a highly competitive environment.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And you're right. Like, I think the environment really shapes that. One other story that I heard about you growing up was that your first business was putting strings together for tennis rackets. Is that right?
It's interesting because my brother was actually an excellent tennis player. So he sort of grew up playing with Mark Philippoussis, and I was an average tennis player. I was much better at other sports sort of later in my life. But we'd play 3-4 times a week at minimum, and we'd constantly be breaking strings. So, I think I was 12 or 13, and we grew up in a really great, we had everything we needed as a child or as a teenager, but $150 to get your racket restrung all the time every week on any parent is the load. So we conned mum and dad into buying us a racket stringing machine, and then sort of taught ourselves how to string it. And then lo and behold, within sort of 6 months, we're stringing half of the town's tennis rackets and making money. So, you turn a problem into a solution and then a revenue opportunity, I suppose, on the back of it.
Yeah, I love that. What were, I look back at the very first thing that I started, like side hustle that I started at high school, and it was so silly and basic, but like learned a lot of lessons from that I've sort of been able to apply later in life. I guess what were some of the lessons that you kind of took away, both from, I guess, like you said, being in that sort of ultimate competitive environment, but also, turning those kind of opportunities into sort of revenue generating exercises? What were some of the things that you sort of took away from that?
Yeah, I think some of the number one thing I took out of it in growing up with my brother was to get the money up front and don't have debtors on your balance sheet, because to try and get the money out of him after I've done the job was near impossible, and normally ended up in a violent act. So there's those little things you learn in business, whether it's getting money as soon as you can, not have debtors on your balance sheet, to obviously producing a quality product so you get repeat customers, to paying a referral fee if somebody introduces you to string the racket and give the kid down the road a $5 per part of it. It's all really simple, but I think it applies to most businesses all across the globe.
And what did that sort of journey look like for you in starting your first business, BikeExchange? Because from what I understand, you had quite a successful career at that time. And again, from what Sam tells me, he sort of picked up the phone. You were living in the UK at the time, and he sort of came to you with this opportunity, and he said, before I even really pitched you the idea, you said you were in. Where was that? What was that sort of process like for you, and what made you sort of ready to kind of jump in?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough that I probably had the IQ and the EQ, if that makes sense. So I got pretty good marks in high school, and then went through and actually did a chartered accounting, a fully qualified chartered accountant. I worked for KPMG for years in Melbourne. And then I went across to London. I worked for Reuters and Morgan Stanley, the investment bank over there. And I always felt that you're always working in decimal points, or you're always working into the past. And, I always felt that working for somebody else, you're building yes, you get great holidays, and yes, you earn good wages. But in particular here in Australia at that time, when I had nothing to lose, you're giving half your money to the government all the time. You're not building an asset. But most importantly, you're not doing something that you can put your stake into and say you're proud, like I was proud of. And I always felt that I had it in me to go and to be a creator and an inventor, which is a hard thing to say about yourself. But I think the older you get, the more comfortable you are with actually saying, I am an inventor and I'm a creator, and I'm okay with that journey. And I wanted to look back, whether it's today or in 10 years time or in 20 years time, and say that I've done something in my career, I've done something with my life, both professionally in my career, both with my family, both with myself, and both with my home.
Yeah. Again, was that something that was always there for you, or did that sort of present itself to you over time as you kind of, as you said, sort of got into the investment banking world and sort of realized that, as you put it, you were sort of working more on decimal points and sort of making the big impact that you wanted?
Yeah, good question. I think once I sort of finished school, I actually raced competitive lifesaving for years. And then, I did the Nutri-Grain series with another buddy in there, and, on multiple Australian championships, and represented the country. And I think that achievement and that feeling of winning on a global basis, or in this case, an Australian basis, but I went on and raced powerboats in the UK and around the world. And I won like multiple world championships, and that feeling of winning and actually achieving something and being the best of something in the world is quite a unique experience. It doesn't matter whether you're a ping pong table tennis player or you've got a small startup that becomes the best in the world. But once you have that feeling, it's kind of like a drug, right? It's those endorphins that you can't get anywhere else, and you constantly try and strive to do it again.
Yeah, I was actually about to ask about the powerboating thing, because I was very surprised to learn that, you'd sort of won, as you said, multiple world championships. First of all, how did you get into that sport to begin with, and how did that sort of come about?
Yeah, so it was through lifesaving and just the experience in lifesaving. And, I played footy and tennis and, all different types of sports. But ultimately, I was pretty successful in that. And then I actually had a sponsor reach out to me in Dubai. He was an English guy living in Dubai, and he eventually sponsored me. So I was fortunate enough to travel the world and race sort of powerboats. I raced multiple classes over in England, and I won multiple English titles and all the rest of it. But it's a young person sport, I should say. You have no fear. Like if you have fear, you die. You imagine at some point, you're going on water that is a moving road you're going 110 mile an hour. In some instances, you've got no brakes, you've got wind that moves it, and you've got waves. So it's the ultimate death trap when you think about the different types of sports that you can do. So you've got to let all fears go. You can't have an ounce of fear in you in doing it. So I think it's good as a young person's sport, but I also looked forward and I saw people in their 40s, their reflexes slow down, their desperation, they come in late, and sometimes that ends in tragedy.
Yeah. Also, when I was speaking to Sam, one of the things that he mentioned, and I think it's a journey that everyone has when they call up their mate and say, hey, I've got this idea, and you get really excited about something. So you guys spent a bunch of time talking about the idea, making a logo, eventually got a website up and running. I feel like there's this kind of death period where essentially so many people have these great ambitions, great ideas, but they just kind of fall by the wayside because life just gets in the way, work, there's a million one things going on. I guess what was that was there an inflection point for you guys that kind of shifted from here's something that we're just talking about and kind of playing around a little bit with to going, actually, we're fully in this?
Yeah, there was an interesting, I think there's a couple of points when you think through. So everything is easy for when it's free, if that makes sense. So if you've got an idea, you're going to meet your friend on the weekend, you've probably got a business plan, you're starting to think about a name, you're starting to think, have I got market fit? You're looking at your Sam and Tam, and you've looked at Google and learned how to create a business plan. But ultimately, when you put your life savings into something and you're about to lose everything, I think that's an inflection point. So the first thing is I always ask founders is, have you put your own money into this thing, or are you playing with other people's money the whole time? And if the answer is I put no money into it ever, the chances are they're playing with funny money, like you're playing Monopoly, and you're not losing your own heart and soul and sweat, for a better word. So I think that's a core inflection point. Sam and I's journey was a tiny bit different because what we did is I think we put $26,000 in to start with, so $13,000, which wasn't a ton of money, right? And then I don't want to say we got sucked in, but we got sucked into spending $8,000 of it on a logo, which seems like an extraordinary amount of money now, and that's right, it is an extraordinary amount of money on a logo back then. So would I do it again? 100% no. But then we actually this was 2005. So there was no Shopify. Magento really didn't even exist. There was no platform. You had to invent everything that you did. So we sort of went out there to the market and said, hey, here's the website on, like, here is BikeExchange on 200 pages. We've designed it to the nth degree, and we pitched it out there to 20 different development firms. And the sophistication in development firms aren't anywhere near what they are today. So the quotes come back from $3,000 to $500,000 to build it. So, like, the reality is anything above, $18,000 we couldn't afford. So we were cooked above that. So, and there was a range of 3 to 4 in the middle. So we went and interviewed them and all these types of things. So the 3,001, we just discounted it. We just knew it was going to work. But we did go with a partner that said, okay, for $18,000, I can get you live, right? So I can get you a point where you can go and test your product, you can go and sell it, and you can go to the bike stores, you can go to people who want to sell their bikes, and you can get that online. And then I will never forget, we turn up 4 weeks later, I've transferred the $18,000, and we've gone to the offices. We're really excited, like, we're very detailed, like, we've designed absolutely every single page, and we turn up and we look at it and we go, this is just nothing like we asked for. This doesn't fit anything. He says, no, you're right, it doesn't fit anything, but I tell you what, you give me a third of your business, I'll help you in your business, I'll teach you how to be a different type of business person, and I'll rebuild the website for you. And that was probably the second largest inflection point. So we had no money, we had no money in the bank account, like nothing. We didn't really have a we didn't have a platform or a website, and there's a decision point there. Do you give him a third, or do you bury the hatchet? Do you say, I know this is such a good idea that it can move forward? And it's interesting. What do you think we did?
I mean, I hope you walked away.
We didn't. We gave him a third of the business.
You gave him a third of the business, really?
Yeah. And if we didn't, we wouldn't have had BikeExchange. We wouldn't have had Marketplacer.
Interesting.
We did buy him out later.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I would have just been really put off with someone, rinsing you. And I think there's just that like sunk cost of, shit, if someone's like taking my money and they're just not a good person to work with, like, do I really want to continue on with that? But yeah.
Never let ego get in the way of a good decision is my second sort
True.
of lesson in there. And do you know what? We did learn from that person. Like, it's not like we didn't learn across the journey. They were older. They had some, really good ideas. They toughened us up in a certain amount of areas, but it's a different way to get a third of a business.
That's crazy. So what did that process look like after you kind of said yes to that person coming up for a third of the business? What were the initial stages of BikeExchange like?
Do you know, it was, and it's no different to any business. Like, we had to be inventors of the platform. We had to be inventors of our sales cycle and our sales process. We had to be inventors of our onboarding cycle. We had to go out there and be uncomfortable with the sales cycle and what that looks like. And we had to hustle like mad. And that's exactly what we did. So, we didn't have huge amounts of capital to go out there and employ a head of sales and a head of success. We were the promo person on the streets in South Australia for the Tour Down Under. We were the customer service person in a different acting voice when somebody called and said, "Can I speak to customer service?" We were the CEO, managing director, and coffee maker at the same time. And I think that learning of doing everything at an early stage of a startup is something. It's a gift, really, that people can't take off you. That you get to carry forward for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Just going back maybe to that decision. So one other thing that Sam mentioned was, I think he mentioned that he came from a print background, or that was the initial sort of concept was, especially at that time, as you said, there wasn't the Shopify, like digital isn't what it was back then. And so I guess the other kind of pathway or the opportunity is like, oh, maybe this tech stuff is too hard. Like, should we just go back to print or do something that's a little bit easier? What gave you that sort of conviction in terms of staying the course with it and deciding to make that decision?
Yeah, I think if you look back at, you always need a couple of unfair advantages in business. And, the unfair advantages the biggest unfair advantage was probably Sam's mum, Judy. So Judy ran classified businesses. So think of the old Trading Post, and it was actually a Just 4x4 group, and worked for the Trader Group back in the day. So that concept of a two-sided world where you had consumers wanting to inquire back then, and then dealers who want to sell their trucks or cars or boats. Classifieds were the old rivers of gold if you think back in time. So the evolution, realestate.com had just really kicked off. Car Sales has just listed. I remember calling Greg Roebuck on the day that Car Sales listed and said you should buy BikeExchange. So it's before the evolution of online, but it was clear as day it was the future. Like it was just so easy, convenient. Everything was in one spot. But there was still, I remember when we walked around to we did the first sort of bike store run together. I still think we got chased out of 5 stores saying, "Hey, you guys are crazy. No one's ever going to buy a bike online." And the world's a totally different place.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, why did you guys pick bikes as the vertical to go after?
Yeah, and probably the second superpower was Sam's background into it, in that his father was an amazing cyclist and owned a bike store. So he had a bit of an intel into the industry and how it worked. And it was in the generation where Lance Armstrong was going. If you have a Michael Jordan generation, there's one that's once in a lifetime. We had a Lance Armstrong generation, so there was more bikes sold than cars. So there's about 1,100 bike brands. So it's a highly fragmented brand industry. It was in a world where you looked at the independent bike retailer, and when you talked around what's SEO or what's SEM, or there was no Facebook advertising. So we knew that there was going to be this world where an entire industry needed to modernize and advertise and trade online. and there was no platform to do it. So it was just really making it easy for them to do that. And then from a consumer perspective, if there's that many products and that many brands and it's so fragmented, we have to make it, easy, convenient, and make them feel like they're getting a great value for the product that they're purchasing. Doesn't have to be the best price, just needs to be great value.
We're going to take a very quick break from this podcast to talk about one of our partners, Vanta. So if you're building a SaaS business and want to quickly unlock growth and build customer trust, one way to do this is by achieving compliance with SOC 2, ISO 27001, CPS 234, Essential 8, or other in-demand compliance frameworks. However, this process is often time-intensive and very costly. Vanta automates up to 90% of compliance, making you audit-ready quickly and saving you up to 85% of associated costs. And not only that, Vanta scales with your business. With a market-leading trust management platform to help you continuously monitor compliance, unify risk management, and streamline security reviews. You can join over 8,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, and Indebted that use Vanta to build trust and prove security in real time. As a listener of the show, you can get up to $1,000 US off Vanta when you head over to vanta.com/demo. All right, let's get back to the episode. And, speaking of there being no platform, I guess was it relatively early on in the journey that I guess other people started approaching you and saying, hey, we want to build something similar but in a different vertical? Is there a way for us to partner up on this? Or like what was the inflection point that sort of led to Marketplacer?
Yeah, it was interesting because my dad had an accounting practice and sort of a financial firm, and we always structured the company day one in silos a little bit. So we always had the IP in a company from an asset protection perspective, and then we had a trading company. So we were kind of always thought that they were two separate businesses that in that way. And in 2012, we actually won Telstra Business of the Year, and it was a cracking small business. It was an incredibly talented team. I think we had 12 people. We were highly profitable. Had great growth metrics behind it, and on the back of really winning a couple of EY Entrepreneur and Telstra Business of the Year, a lot of people approached us through people we knew and people who we didn't knew and say, hey, that's a great idea. Can we do this for the furniture game? Can we do this for babies' kids? Can we do a ticketing marketplace? Can we do a holiday marketplace? And on the back, that's probably where the idea of Marketplacer was born. But the model probably come out of, I was fortunate enough to have some amazing mentors in life. So Peter Bartels, who has been our mentor from very, very early on in our journey, he said, Jason, you need to go and speak to a bloke who's pretty good at, these kind of modeling things. And he said, I'm going to set you up a meeting in Sydney next week. I said, no problem, Peter, I'll just fly up. And then I looked at the invite and it was Jerry Harvey. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so wow. I had 3-hour mentoring sessions with Jerry Harvey, and the lessons he taught me in that was how do you get really talented people, like his franchise model, how do you get really talented people to put skin into the game and leverage your IP and assets to grow together. And that's back then is what we call the Exchange Group, and that's the model that we ran with prior to Marketplacer and really spinning Marketplacer out.
Yeah, I definitely want to come back to the point about finding great talent, but from what I understand before, like the precursor to Marketplacer was you guys ended up doing a bunch of joint ventures.
Which is that Exchange Group, yeah.
Yeah. Again, what were some of in hindsight, it's really obvious where things were heading, but what was that, I guess, point that sort of led you from going, actually, we need to close off this whole split focus around the joint venture model and focus more on building the platform?
When you think about any business and you look at unfair advantages, when I looked at the market back then, to build a two-sided marketplace and a platform at the same time and do that with 11 companies is hard. So in each of those businesses, each of them needed to be unbelievably salespeople. They had to have an amazing customer focus. They had to be great marketeers. And then they had to have deep subject matter expert on the industry that they're going after. And that probably wasn't always the case behind it. And sometimes it was too early and we couldn't break through it. Some were more successful than others. But when sitting back, I was looking at these massive retailers and these businesses around the world that it was kind of like playing tennis with basketballs. It was just so obvious that at one point in time, they're going to want to grow without the need of holding inventory. they're going to want to grow limitlessly. They're going to, without the need of, grow without the need of opening new warehouses and shipping it themselves. And I saw our platform and said, you know what, this could be a dropship platform. This can be a marketplace platform. This can be whatever you call it. But the problem we're trying to solve is how to make some of the best retailers and audiences in the world grow without the need of owning any inventory. And that's really where the idea of Marketplacer was born. And we were fortunate enough to have our first client in Maya in the Australian market, who sort of backed us in as a very small, unscaled Australian startup. But, through relationships and trust, we were able to convince them that we were the right partner for them.
Yeah, we were chatting at a dinner a couple of weeks ago, and it was one of the things that you kind of mentioned is, all of these sort of incredible enterprise customers, and you ask any startup, that's, the golden goose, but trying to get into enterprise customers is so difficult as a new business. But from what I understand, you had a lot of inbound interest coming in pretty much out the gate. How did that sort of come about? And has that been I guess that was kind of natural, but has that been a more strategic decision in terms of how you sort of thought about building and growing the business since?
Yeah, it's interesting because we started in the smaller startup space, and in doing that, actually, what you often find in the startup space, the platforms become much wider. They solve many more problems, just not at enterprise scale, because startups can't have 1,000 things in there. Like, look at Shopify; it's a perfect example. You connect to Shopify, you can probably solve most problems in the world now through the app store, through on an online basis, right? So yeah, it's kind of like a one-stop shop in there. But when we were going into, when we actually were going through the tender process for Maya, because it was a competitive tender, we actually look at what we had and said, wow, because we've been owning and running these marketplaces for so long, we've got this IP and it's this really in-depth knowledge about what it takes. There's sort of two secret sources. Yes, we have a platform, but our IP about how to help these businesses actually scale up is just as much as the secret sauce. And over time, we've put that IP into automation within the platform, and now we're building AI tools within it, machine learning tools and pre-configurations around it to make it easier, faster, smarter, and more flexible. But it's that ability to really, ramp that up and to drive that through that's made a significant difference over that journey. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess the other side of the enterprise customers is like you said, just kind of almost focus on that specific area. How do you find that focus? So again, I guess going back to that whole period where you've got 11 different joint ventures that you've got running, BikeExchange is doing well as a company. Was that a difficult decision for you to sort of pull back or kind of figure out the right sort of structure so you could give Marketplace the focus that it needed to grow and become what it has?
Yeah, and over time you learn 100%, but over time you learn the less you do, the better you go. And it's really hard when you first start to get that around your head. So we were very fortunate. Like, we look at marketplacer.com, it's just a B2B website. But we had Woolies email us and say, hey, I want to create a marketplace. We had Qantas inbound email us and said, I want to create a marketplace. We actually had Tesco who, to put the idea of scale, that's the scale of our Tesco contract, is Tesco do £11 billion online. So alone, and then I'll never forget, it was a Saturday morning, come through Friday afternoon there, and Tesco.com, I'd like to create a marketplace. Can someone call me back? So my first call was to 10 of my mates to say, hey, stop taking the piss out of me. There's no way this is happening to us. So that enterprise scale, once you get into it, is sort of really, really quite unique. And as we walked into it, when we think of BikeExchange, we used to have a full stack where we could have an e-commerce platform and you could create a marketplace overnight. And that's how we did businesses like Providor during COVID, right? There's no way Providor could have ever existed in the speed that it existed if we didn't have the full stack. But as we got smarter, a lot more strategic, we figured out we were mining diamonds and not gold. So diamonds, you pick a narrow thing, you go deep down and you get a lot of them. And the full stack was ultimately a distraction. Another way to think about it is, whether it's BikeExchange, whether it's the businesses in the exchange group, whether it's our full stack offering that we've now decommissioned, it's ultimately the scaffolding that's been put on the outside with the big building coming in through the middle. So, something I always think about is you're never too big to pivot. You're never too big to really look about what is the best assets in your business, and you can never be afraid to turn off ultimately sometimes parts of your business that are the noisiest, that are the most distractive, but are the less accretive from a shareholder or a value perspective.
That's actually something Bob, who's on your board, mentioned, and Bob's got an incredible background as well. But yeah, he said that your superpower was just not being afraid of those decisions. And, obviously there are instances where you have to accelerate growth. There have been instances where you've decelerated growth. And from what I understand, there was also a story about how you sort of turned off a product or a suite of products that actually turned off a large part of your revenue for the business.
Yeah, that was that full stack revenue. So it was effectively a front end that sat in front of marketplaces. So we were not competing because we'd never go against them, but we basically had to build the equivalent functionality of what Shopify had. So with limited resources, you eventually have to make choices around where your ultimate opportunity is. So we turned off 35% of the revenue 2 years ago and spun through, which, we've got great shareholders, we've got great board, but, that's a brave decision. But now our support tickets are 70% down. Our development cycle around the core product is 4 times faster. So with less distraction, less noise, what you often find this is that your smallest, most noisiest customers who give you the least amount of business create all of the noise. So, we were able, and it wasn't their fault, but we were able to really have a really core focus and focus on the core product, which was ultimately the product that enabled everybody to grow without the need of holding inventory, but you didn't have to run the whole ecosystem to be able to do that. And in doing that, it's just so obvious then what we were able to focus on. We were able to focus on marketplaces coming out of the box with suppliers already in it. So you don't have to go and sell them and sign them up. The ability for pre-connection. So if the seller's on Shopify or BigCommerce or one of the e-commerce systems, that they can seamlessly sell without having to do anything. They just process the orders. The ability to put automation in for ingesting the products into the ecosystem and platform. So all of these things, if we had to do everything, we will never be able to get onto and to be able to scale at the rate that we're currently kind of scaling at.
There's 2 parts of that I think would be interesting to dive into. One is you touched on the importance of having the right shareholders and board. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you've kind of thought about structuring the board and how you sort of have effectively built up the right type of relationship in that dynamic for that to be a productive rather than a more challenging situation, especially when you've got to make difficult decisions?
Yeah, and I think your relationship with your board is no different to your relationship with family. Like, it's something that doesn't have a, it's not like this is everyone's role and responsibility and it sets there. So it's got to be fluid and it's got to be an open and transparent layer of communication. So my first advice to anyone who's building a board is probably start with the skill set that you think can help you on your growth journey. So rather than just have investors on there who give you money, any really great investor will say, I actually don't want to be on the board unless they've got a skill set that can help you along your journey, whatever your journey is. So my first thing is what do you need to be successful? Do you need someone in America to help you with the American market if you want to expand into America? Do you need someone if you're creating a technology business, do you need a technologist who's done it before? They've created a global partnership ecosystem. They've created a global SI ecosystem. If you're doing enterprise, someone who's sold and signed up large enterprise accounts and understands it. If you're hitting the SMB market, somebody who understands the acquisition funnel and the deal cycle that does it. Doesn't mean they have to do it for you, but if I took my 25, if I wound myself back to 25 and I could grab my knowledge from now and give it to me back then, it'd cost 1/10 of the money and I'd get there twice as fast. So when I think of board members and their role, it's how do they make you get there so much faster and so much easier than if you're going to go and do it yourself from a business perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So as I kind of referenced to Bob, I had the fortune of talking to him prior to this interview, and one of the things that he mentioned was you came and pitched to him initially, BikeExchange, where you said, "Hey mate, guess what we're working on." But from what I understand, that was even before Marketplace was a thing, but you kind of told him about the vision of what you guys were building, and you were kind of like very clear that once you launched something, you wanted to bring him on as a board member. I guess from your perspective, was that, again, when you talk about having the right sort of board composition, right people around you, is that a day one thing? Like when do you sort of recommend startups start really sort of thinking about that for their business?
Yeah, and Bob's an interesting character, right? So to put it in context, he grew up in Seattle next door to the Nordstrom family, which Nordstrom, for the folk in Australia, is the probably leading department store in the United States. And he was CMO of Nordstrom. He launched Nordstrom.com, and he was global chair and CEO of Magento when they scaled up. So he's kind of a bit of a superpower when you're trying to create a global tech company into the retail space. But, I think if you're in a startup, you're always interviewing. So whether you go into a dinner at a startup event, whether you get to go and speak to someone at a conference, and the whole time you kind of, if you're building a playbook, which what this show is about, then you're starting your recruitment journey as a recruiter from day one of starting it. You might not be able to afford them today. You might not need them today, but I can guarantee you across your journey, your network, you'll need people into the future. So I always nearly treated myself as a little bit of a recruiter trying to build, a sporting team, not just for today, but to win your premiership or your championship in 5 years' time. And who do you need and when do you need it? And I sort of mapped that out in my mind. At the end of every year, I'd kind of put my little team together into a future team and a current team, future organization structure. How does that look like? And, so that's the kind of way I did it. So once a year at least, I would sit there and say, okay, what do I need today? I'm going to be here tomorrow. What's the skill sets I'm going to need to be here tomorrow? When I'm out at the conferences, when I'm out, I'm trying to get to know these people. So when I need to pull the trigger, I can pull the trigger.
Love that. Great advice. The second part of, I guess, making that big decision. So we spoke about the board. The second part is you yourself just even taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture with stuff. So again, if you're just focused on day-to-day, week-to-week growth, there's no way that you're going to go shutting off 35% of our business is the right thing to do. Are there any habits or practices that you have to, I guess, pull you out of the day-to-day or kind of get you to think about the bigger picture that you follow?
Everyone has their own sort of escapisms or meditation spots, but mine has always been sport. If I'm not doing sport on a daily basis, definitely every second day, whether it's going to the gym, whether it's surfing, whether it's skiing, that's kind of my meditation in life. And I've never had a good idea in an office. So, whether it's traveling or whether it's in that meditative space when you do sport, I find it, I take that opportunity to really think through. It's funny. There's a lesson I learned when we first started. There's a guy called Sean Van Wees, and he's a Belgian guy, but he's mad. Like, he's mad. He's mad, but super fun. But he's an inventor. So he actually started a business called Laser Helmets, the laser bike helmets. You might have
seen them.
I've seen them. He sold his business for a lot of money to Shimano, which is another bike business. But every year Sam and I would go riding with him when he comes to the Tour Down Under. Because you don't think of yourself as an inventor, do you? When you first start a startup, you don't go, this is my product. I'm a product owner and I'm going to be proud of my product when people use it all over the world. But we would go riding down Beach Road together. And then he's a great guy, but he's definitely got a quirky personality. So we'd be riding with him, he'd say blue, 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 yellow, black, black. And I go, what are you doing? He's going, I'm counting how many blue and black helmets there are to get the market share. So next year I need to understand what colors I need to put into the product. So the lesson I took out of that was your role as a product inventor, your role as a founder, it never stops. And your best market research is in the real world. And so many people switch off in that. But I get my best ideas walking around London, looking at the retail space. I get my best ideas traveling the world. So I always say you're not always working. You can switch off, but you're always inventing.
Do you then, as a result, make time to travel or play sports? Like, is that a big part of how you sort of structure your day or kind of think about routines for yourself?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I'll go to the gym most days in the morning, and it's just like an hour to smash yourself. The good endorphins flow on the back of it, and I'm very fortunate very fortunate, but it can be taxing at times. But I get to travel the world maybe 8 times a year. So, and in that space, you know, you have weekends when you're by yourself and you're away from your family. You know, what I really try to do is deliberately, with some purpose, is go out on the weekends when I've got or when I've got some free time, and physically walk the streets with the purpose of doing research and understanding and looking at the new trends. So although you might not think walking the streets of London or New York or Chicago or LA is work, but if you go there with an inventive mindset, I can guarantee you'll always come up with an idea.
Love that. Great advice. And going back to your point about, you know, you're almost always recruiting on things. Again, someone else I got to speak to was Richard on your team, who mentioned that when he first met you, you guys were still working on BikeExchange at that time in 2015. He said that he booked so many meetings with you guys to come down to Melbourne on the hope that you guys would end up listing on eBay, which is where he was working at the time. And then he eventually came in and joined Marketplacer in 2020. And I think he said a little while after he joined that you said, yeah, we had no intention of ever coming onto eBay. We just wanted to hang out and eventually poach you into the business. And I think that's a part of that story that's often lost for a lot of people, is like a lot of these things are, you know, finding and identifying talent and just having the right opportunity at the right time just takes time. And for that, with Richard, it seems like it was a 5-year journey. Again, any advice to founders in terms of like building that brand, having that recruitment hat on, like always sort of looking for talent? Like what do you look for and how do you sort of think about doing that in your day-to-day?
Yeah, so I don't think people work for companies. I think people work for people. So if you're, you know, and whether it's good times or whether it's bad times, you know, people belong and they have that sense of belonging to a brand and a company. But ultimately, the leadership, your culture, your values, the journey and the vision is what people really resonate with across that. And if you've already built all of that rapport by the time you're ready to employ, the ramp up of these people just so, like, of your team and your culture is just so much faster and better. And then if you're spending time with people socially, if you're spending time with their customers and you see how they interact, the recruitment journey is very simple, isn't it? Like, where if you stick yourself in your home office and do an online interview and don't go out there to startup meets and into you know to the conferences and put yourself out there and really engage socially, the chances are your ability to actually recruit talent, one, but most importantly the right fit for your people and culture strategy and your DNA of your company ultimately is a much smaller chance than a 5-step interview process from scratch.
Yeah. And I think, like you said as well, I think it just comes with an inherent amount of trust from that person. So it's actually someone that worked for both of us. James Harrison, who was on your customer success team at BikeExchange, was my investment manager with Playbook Ventures for a little while. And yeah, again, James and I had known each other for a number of years. And, you know, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but, you know, he doesn't necessarily come from a strong investment background or any of those sort of things. He was just, those were things I could teach someone, but I couldn't teach the trust and responsibility and just the relationship that we had where, you know, essentially he'd just come in and we could sort of run from day one versus, again, if you don't have that sort of history, it's a little bit harder to sort of build that up. And then you just don't know whether there'll be alignment even long term with those sort of things. No,
and James is a classic example of somebody who didn't come in with learned skills, right? Like, you know, he come in green, but had, you know, an amazing attitude, had the right values, the ability, had the IQ, the ability to learn, and then most importantly, he had some fun along the journey and hopefully learn a bit and take those skills out for the rest of his life. So, you know, I think he's the perfect example of the right people and culture fit that did a really great job for us in those early days.
Xender is the OG startup accounting firm in Australia, catering to all stages of your business life. If you're busy running a business, you don't always have the time to do your own books and forecasts, and instead you can fully outsource your finance function so that you have the time and resources back to do what you do best, which is growing your business. They have a dedicated focus on founders, funds, and startups, and have an experienced team that can help you with everything from managing your tax to balancing your books to even helping with your exit strategy. I trust and use them with all of my businesses and can't recommend them highly enough. To find out more or to speak to Gareth and the team, head over to sender.com. All right, let's get back to this episode. Something else, like just on this theme of people and culture, I know one of the other things that we kind of spoke about at the dinner was just the challenge of scaling globally. And specifically, I think we were talking about the example of going to the US and how just culturally there's some differences in how sort of the cultures are, people are, and those sort of things. Again, do you want to share a little bit of what that sort of experience was like in terms of hiring and expanding into international markets, and I guess like lessons from building teams in markets outside of Australia?
Yeah, it's interesting. So people say America's hard and America's different, and America is costly, and America takes more time than you think it's going to. And I agree with them completely because it's just a completely different cultural sales cycle, a completely different cultural place. I think it's fair to say American businesses like buying from well-established American companies. So for you to break in there and to not be the safe bet, which is the safe bet, then you've got to have a point of difference in market versus everybody else. So when we first went to America, we hired, senior American people, ex-SAP. We were well capitalized in those markets in those times. We hired senior IBM people, and we kind of forgot a bit about our people and culture. So we kind of thought, well, to be successful in America, we've got to be how Americans do it. And the reality is we had different hustle mentality. They were great people, like that, nothing against the people. But what we quickly realized is that we needed a bit of Aussie DNA in our startup because that's how we got successful. And that's when we sent Richard Hankin over. So the first question I really ask when people say go to America is, do you need to be in America to sell in America? So my first step is, if you can't win a customer from here, don't think just because you're over there, you're going to start to win them. So, and we did that. We won Albertsons here. We won the Gap pretty much from here. But if you can't sell from here into America, be really careful about going to spend millions and millions of dollars before going over there. And then even when you go over there, I still think it's really important that you adopt clearly you got to adopt everything about being American in America, but also have a local DNA that understands your culture, your people, and the heartbeat of your company when you go over there. So if I, again, could wind myself back, I would send my most talented core people to not do it being American in America, but more so to just link up the mothership back into the local market.
I think it's a really good point as well about, do you physically need to be in that country to do that? And, to your point about, I think a lot of it is credibility and trust. So if you're an Australian company that no American company's ever heard of before, it's just going to be very hard for you to have that cut through, in the same way that, as you mentioned, if you go to them once you've got Albertsons and Gap and those sort of things, it's just a different level of conversation. For any business that's, at that sort of stage where they're thinking about sort of international markets and those sort of things, do you have any advice on how you can start approaching or potentially looking at winning some international customers before heading over?
Yeah, I think it ultimately depends on where your leads are coming from. So in a global world with global advertising, the best way I would start with my marketing dollar first, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And then if you can't drive leads out of the market, then something's kind of wrong, right? So I think your lead indicator is probably the best initial thoughts about where do I go next. We didn't necessarily strategically pick the UK, but we had no choice. We just had so many leads coming from there, and our leads were Tesco and BT and some of the most amazing retailers in the world. Now, we won all of those without having a base, but now we've got a base there and anchored around it. So we started with the marketing dollar and started with the leads. They're small bets online. And if you can drive those leads and drive those conversions, then ultimately the market should be able to pick where you are.
Yeah. Well, one thing that has really resonated for me from this talk is, what you've kind of essentially said about how do you build a really special team of people, really special type of like product and business. How do you sort of think about planning for that or sort of building that out from day one? So going back to the early stages of marketplace, like I'm thinking specifically in terms of your conversation with Bob, how much of that is sort of strategic planning and sort of thinking ahead with all of the different parts of the business and kind of retaining that focus to just understand where the magic is for you? How much of that is, I guess, like you said, playing sport, just having those thoughts versus going out and speaking to customers, or how do you sort of get to that specific point?
Yeah, so getting the right product, getting the right product fit in the right way and picking the right strategic outcome. So, product fit is everything. Like, because if you don't have, I could probably go sell most things in the world. Ultimately, I think we're a good sales organization. But if you sell them and it doesn't work, all you have is a big churn number. So deeply understand, and anyone who knows me and has worked with me at Marketplace and knows I'm a product person, is that I've been involved in the marketplace of products from day one. And understanding those needs and wants within a product is the primary core function of a good CEO running a technology company. So, something we won't do is we won't sell something we don't have in that. So that means you make tough decisions. Like, do you go into Europe where you don't understand the tax laws, where you've got no, you haven't adapted the platform for currency, where you haven't adapted the platform for language. So they're tough decisions. So in that journey between going from an Australian startup into an international business, the product fit and understanding the regulatory changes, understanding the cultural differences, understanding what you need to physically do to get it, you deeply need to understand that. Because if you go there and oversell it, all you do is churn them out. And it's very expensive. It's a very expensive cycle, but it's also completely brand damaging for you across the journey in that. Yeah.
And from what I understand, you had sort of strategic investors on board as well. I believe Salesforce Ventures were one of your investors. What stage did they come on for you guys?
They come in when we probably did one of our major first rounds. So, we're very fortunate. It was a very hot product in the market. And we were starting to sign up a lot of Salesforce Commerce Cloud customers, right? Like, so, we had this great momentum behind it. And then they also, at the same time, they had a local VC arm launch within the Australian market, of which we were fortunate enough to be connected into. And then we got global sponsorship behind that. So with someone like a Salesforce, so if you think, there's 2-3 sort of cohorts, isn't there? There's family offices, which is typically family office VCs in the space in the Australian market. Then there's your your PE funds, pre-IPO funds into that bucket. And then there's your strategics in there. And we've had a few strategics across the journey. And typically in a strategic, though, when they don't act like a true VC or a true fund, is that typically you'd have to get a global sponsor to sign off to say this is an alignment to our global strategy, and we could see a pathway where we can help you and we can scale you that's different to a traditional landscape. And we were fortunate enough with Salesforce in the early days where we did receive that help and had that benefit of getting promoted to every Salesforce Commerce Cloud customer, receiving a lead from the Salesforce Global Salesforce team, go-to-market teams as they needed marketplace features attached to it. So, and that's that kind of accelerator model behind an investment strategy that if you can get it, it definitely makes a difference.
Yeah. I mean, how different was it pitching to a strategic investor like a Salesforce Ventures versus pitching to a traditional VC fund? And, I guess not everyone has the good fortune of being able to pick and choose their investors, but I guess how important was that sort of strategic help for you as you were sort of thinking about structuring who would sort of come in on specific rounds for the business?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because financial investors, they care about the metrics. Just understand the metrics in your business. And if you're not ready, keep your powder dry to when you are ready. So the rule of 40, if you're in the private equity space today and you're not in the rule of 40, the chances if you get into money are pretty small, right? Like, so understanding, your LTV ratios and your CAC and all of those things in the financial world, your time to onboard, your time to sale, the ability for you to spin up. Because what they effectively do is they grab your data, they go rebuild their own models, and they compare to every other investment that they could do. And even if they love you as a person, love you as a founder, it's still got to stack up at the end of the day from a financial basis within it. And then strategic investors are different because it's a relationship, and behind any relationship, there's two sides to that relationship, and there's a give-get on both sides, isn't there? So marketplace will give access, give intel into our future roadmap, for example, about where we're heading, about all of those things, and we'll get potential more opportunities out of that ecosystem. With Salesforce, we were able to grow their ecosystem faster because we were effectively increasing the entire supply side for all of their customers. So that means they sold more GMV, and we could accelerate their model and accelerate our model. So there's that strategic relationships that always significantly help us just scaling through.
And maybe just, I guess final kind of topic to cover with you. I've got so many things to talk about, but one thing that came crystal clear from everyone that I spoke to was, obviously very sort of driven and ambitious of what you've done with every business that you've had, but family is a really sort of important pillar for you. I think quite a few people said, despite you traveling as much as you do, you're never going to miss a basketball match and those sort of things for your kids. Again, how do you sort of think about that sort of balance and structure for yourself?
I think it's hard in there, but I always think if you think of 4 pillars in your life, I think of, family first, most importantly. And then you've obviously got your professional career. You've got to have yourself in there, your own self-health, your fitness, your mental health and component. And then I always think home, the old story of there's no place like you've got to have a sanctuary within it. So I kind of balance myself between those 4, and I try to actively activate all of those 4 every single day. Now, if you're overseas, you can't have a home, but you can make it feel like you're home, and you can be homely when you're over there. With your family, it's having the discipline in yourself to say, hey, this internal call isn't as important as picking up my daughter today from school when she's had a concert. It's having it's nearly discipline that's going to be able to drive you successful within that. And what I find in my life over the journey, if one of those 4 things is out of whack, I'm not as happy as I should be. So it's a measure of myself every single day, and the discipline of measuring myself is am I doing something for those 4 things every single day? Make my home a better home for me and my family, to make my family life and my broader family life better, to make me a better version of myself every single day, and then obviously my professional ambitions in what that's driving towards.
I love that. Do you I guess like plan for those 4 things ahead of time? Is that more a retroactive, like here's what happened in the day, here's what I need to do next, or what does that, when you talk about measuring that, what does that look like?
Yeah, so yes and no is the answer behind it. So is it a thought that every single day when I wake up? For sure. So some are pre-planned. The gym sessions obviously pre-planned. Your sporting, like if you're playing sport or you're booking urban surfing, going for a surf, it's all pre-planned. What I try to do is something every single day in that space. Clearly the kids and the family behind it are 100% pre-planned in that, because your diaries become too full if you don't pre-plan that and you don't lock that time away. And I'm fortunate I've got an amazing EA who understands me really well, who I also went to primary school with. But she locks that time away and it's untouchable unless the world blows up. But it's got to be a really important thing to shift those things in there. And then you're professional and being a better version of yourself every single day. That just feels not the betterment of it, but the filling up of that space of a founder, that just fills up. Once you start a business in 3 time zones, you're working to 11. I think the other week we did a Forrester Wave review and we finished at 5 a.m. in the morning, right? So your work time will fill up pretty quickly. What I find with the work time is how do you, when you think of business, you think of strategy, structure, then people. So my thinking around that container, for a better word, is how do I allocate myself in my headspace around strategy, structure, and people, and not get totally sucked into operational decisions because operational decisions are like a drug, aren't they? Once you start and people can come to you with operational outcomes, they'll just keep coming to you. But as soon as you empower other people underneath you to start making those operational decisions, what I found, and I come in out, I'm not perfect at it. I don't think anybody is. There's a vulnerability there in everybody. But if you think of strategy, structure, and people, it's definitely helped me along my journey in there as well.
Yeah. And, again, I hope you don't mind me mentioning, but you mentioned that your wife is also, has a highly successful career as well. She sort of travels to Sydney every week, which, makes things doubly difficult as well. How do you guys sort of balance that at home with kids?
Yeah, so Jade, she ran Just Jeans and Portman's for Solu and the Just Group for years, and recently took a job of chief merchandising officer for the Age Group. So for those out there who aren't in the fashion world, AJE, you'll see T-shirts and clothes running around, but it's a high-end sort of fashion brand. And so part of that role is she's got to go to Sydney 2 to 3 days a week, and it's a challenge. So it's a real balancing act in there, but what we ultimately try to do is the time we have together, we really spend together. So something we actively focus on is being present. So if you're with the kids, be present with the kids. If you're, the worst thing I think you can do is have our roles, but when you're there, be distracted and not be in the room. And then we contribute. So, I'm a coach of the footy team. I coach the life-saving team. So it's part of being part of their lives when you're in their lives. For me, it wasn't about being that parent on the sidelines with a latte looking every 10 minutes. It was about actively being in their lives, in their roles, and being part of their journey as they grow up. Love
that. Again, any advice? So I'm sure there's a lot of listeners that are in very similar positions that are just finding it really tough. Any advice in terms of how you not just sort of come to those, like I love what you said in terms of you didn't just want to be sitting, sipping on lattes and just being on the sidelines, just being very intentional with what you have. But again, there's probably a difference between making that realization versus taking actual steps and integrating that into your life. Any advice in terms of how to both understand those priorities, but then also just actually make them priorities as part of your schedule and day to day?
Yeah, so something I've done for a long time, which I think it's a very common thing, but the daily journal. So actually writing it down every single day and holding yourself to account is, I've always got a notepad on me. I've got the Marketplace and notebook. I carry it everywhere. I try and journal myself every single day on those 4 buckets in my life because they're important to me. And I think ultimately, unless you do that and you feel like you're succeeding on a daily basis, you ultimately don't. You're probably not happy in your own self, right? So those basic fundamentals, because everybody has a great strategy until you get punched in the face, and it's in those times that those daily habits that they really sort of do resonate and really get you through those tougher times in life than just having no strategy, having no structure, and doing things on the fly.
Yeah. Speaking of tough times, we kind of started this interview talking about what a big role your dad and brother played in, creating that environment and shaping who you are. I know your dad sort of passed away 3 years ago, and from what I understand, your brother passed away 6 weeks later, which would have been an exceptionally difficult period. And I'm sorry that you had to go through that. But yeah, again, for, I'm sure there are people listening that are going through or will go through similarly extremely challenging periods in their life. How did you go about just keeping yourself above surface and I guess retaining that perspective while still building and growing businesses?
Yeah, it was definitely a challenging period in your life. Like if you've, and the reality is 47 and most 47-year-old, 50, 60-year-olds go through the journey and they're going to have the most important people in their lives pass away. So that was my father. And it was in the middle of COVID. He died in a hospital by himself, and there's 1,000 of those stories in there. And then 6 weeks later, a girl in Geneva decided to go for a drive on a Saturday morning and commit suicide, covered her eyes, let go of the steering wheel, and ran over my brother, the irony was he was riding his push bike.
Oh, my God.
So he was on life support for 12 weeks, and I remember mum and I jumping on our airplane. we went over we landed in Geneva. We're the only people in the airport, so that you couldn't get out of the country. Jade and the kids couldn't come with me. They couldn't exemption to get out of the country because it was in the middle of COVID. And we actually lived in Geneva in Switzerland for 12 weeks while he was on life support. So you go through that journey and eventually having to turn somebody off life support, you go through that entire space and you go, well, it can't get much worse in those times. But the reality is there was sort of two things that always resonated in my mind throughout that journey. One, perspective. Of course it can get worse. Things can always get worse in there. And then you've got to put yourself into that space where you can give yourself perspective. And then the second is gratitude for what you have. And if you have perspective and gratitude, then I had amazing kids. I had an amazing family. I still had a mum. You had all those things that were worth getting up for every single day. I had perspective on, do you know what? Life's tough. The old Ned Kelly saying, such is life in the journey. I can't change that. But what I can wake up every single day is focus on the future. Now, that takes a little bit of time to get your head around. It doesn't matter who you are. But it's a lesson that I take into every single day, into everything that I think about. Like if I've got a tough day at work, well, it's not as bad as that. And the reality is with every single day, if you persist with, pure resilience and that perseverance and you keep working that problem, you might not be able to solve it perfectly. You can't solve that perfectly. But if you keep working the scenario now, Malcolm's kids are around the corner from me. They live 100 metres around. His wife lives 100 around. We've got our family back together. So it's different and it's similar to business. Like things might change, things might pivot, things might be different. You might own less shares. You might not be able to raise exactly the capital. Your plan hasn't gone perfectly. But if you keep working it, what I often find is if you've got the smarts and the resilience and the perseverance and you have perspective and gratitude, you'll end up in a space that you're contentful with and you're very happy with.
I think there's something, as you said, like really beautiful about that perspective. I remember with one of my previous businesses, my co-founder had in his previous life been a doctor, and every time something went wrong, he's like, it's okay, no one's dead. Like, in all of these sort of things will pass in 6 months, a year, whatever. Like these won't be issues that you think about as big as you kind of make them in your head. But yeah, in the moment, sometimes in difficult situations just seem really difficult, but everything passes and it's just a part of life.
Yeah, and if you think of needs and wants, like if you go back down to your core in these situations, you probably want more than you need. Like you need food once a day.
Yeah.
You need your primary air, and you don't need much to ultimately to be happy. You want too much in life is what I've figured out over the journey in that. So once you can get yourself down to that state and you can layer it back in that way, it becomes a bit of a superpower for you too, right? Because now after those horrible things, like I need my family. I don't need a Porsche. I don't need a fancy house. Maybe I want a fancy house or I want to go on holidays overseas, and once you have that perspective and gratitude, it becomes a superpower because you're not afraid of failing anymore. There's nothing that you can fail at.
It's liberating, and obviously you don't want anyone to go through difficult situations or tough times, but like I feel like you said, like there have been instances where I've felt like I was at rock bottom with things, and once you get through it, you're like, I never want to go back there, but knowing that you have gone there and you got through it, again, it's a very freeing and liberating sort of experience and feeling.
Yeah, but I think there's a reality is we are going to go through it. We are going to lose our parents. We are going to have loss in our life. We are probably one day go broke in business or make a mistake that's fatal in business. And, so we are going to go through those challenging times. It's about the resilience and your core and those skill sets that you can build when you get there. And don't get me wrong, it's not easy, right? I'm not sugarcoating this and saying, hey, you'll be fine. Everything's going to be perfect. You have those dark days, but it's the ability to put perspective and gratitude. I just can't, those two words just resonated with me every minute of every day as I went through that journey. And I take them into every day as I go on to the next.
Yeah, love that. I guess on the flip side, so, you know, as you said, having kind of gone through that and having that sort of perspective and gratitude, has that changed anything for you since, in terms of business but also life?
It definitely has, in the view of nearly eliminate the wastage, if that makes sense. So I now don't do anything that I don't want to do, like, or that I don't think is beneficial to others who I deeply care about, or the community, or so there's I like, again, my personal brand, all of this stuff that people do around what other people think about them, I actually don't care about any of it. So every single day I try to be a better version of ourselves, a better version of the business, a better version of our family, but I don't care about what others think of me. I know if I do those things, they'll only have a positive thing to say about it, but I don't wake up and stress about those things. So I don't care what car I drive. If I drive a nice car, it's because I want a nice car. I don't care. I wear black t-shirts 99% of the time, and like I'm like every other bloke in the world. Like, I don't care about those things, and I think that cutting off all that dead weight, it actually frees your mind, and the space that it gives you is quite liberating. I've never used that word before, but I do agree with you. But sometimes it takes those tough lessons to get to that space. A lot of people say they really do it, but I don't really think they do it. But I can guarantee you one thing, I've done it.
Yeah, no, love that. Jason, on that note, thank you so much for coming on the show and for just being so open with your journey, experiences, insights. For anyone that wants to find out more, say hello, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Just reach out on LinkedIn. I'm reasonably active on LinkedIn and get back to it. So yeah, please feel free to reach out. And for those startups out there looking for the perfect playbook, the reality is there is no perfect playbook. You got to build your own. But you can, hopefully there's a couple of lessons and learnings in here of mistakes I've made that might be able to help you across your journey.
That is definitely the ironic thing about naming this thing the Startup Playbook, is exactly as you said, there is no one perfect playbook. But again, Jason, thank you so much for coming on and for sharing your experience and insights. It's been fantastic.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to episode 200 of the Startup Playbook podcast. As always, full show notes from this episode will be available at startupplaybook.co. I'll be back next week with another episode, but in the meantime, if you enjoyed this interview, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. As always, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.